People have always dreamed of ways to go into space. One story, written 300 years ago, told of a flock of wild geese pulling a man to the moon. More than a century ago, Jules Verne wrote a tale of a journey to the moon in a shell fired by a giant cannon. In 1961, the first human being was launched into space by a rocket. Since then, hundreds of other men and women have traveled into space. Truly, we all live now in the space age. Rocket ships that can travel into space were developed in the 20th century. Today, more than 100 of these rockets are launched every year. Spaceships have only explored a small part of our solar system. No one from Earth has ever traveled into outer space beyond the moon, to the planets, or between stars and galaxies. Space begins where Earth's atmosphere ends, but there is no exact boundary. The atmosphere is the blanket of air that protects us from the heat of the sun and the cold of space. 100 miles above the surface of Earth, the atmosphere is almost gone. Blasting off the ground with a rocket is the only way we know to get into space. We can't use an airplane because its wings need air to lift the plane and its engines run on fuel that burns in air. A rocket moves by burning fuel and sending hot gases through an exhaust opening at its bottom. The force of the exhaust pushes the rocket off the ground. Big rockets have 3 sections, or stages. When each stage uses up its fuel, it falls away to make the rocket lighter. Smaller rockets, called boosters, sometimes assist a first-stage rocket in takeoff. Each stage is smaller than the one before. When the third stage is dropped, the rocket's nose opens and a satellite or spaceship continues the journey. Scientists needed to make sure that animals could live in space safely before humans were allowed to go there. On September 20th, 1951, the former Soviet Union launched a rocket with a monkey and 11 mice inside the nose. This flight did not go into orbit, however. It was more like a very fast elevator ride. All of the animals survived the flight. A chimpanzee named Ham was launched into space just before the astronaut Alan Shepard Jr. went into space in 1961. Another chimp, Enos, spent 3 hours in flight before John Glenn's orbital flight in 1962. The list of animals that have gone into space includes rats, dogs, frogs, fish, ants, spiders, snails, beetles, and jellyfish. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin of the former Soviet Union became the first human to orbit Earth. He orbited once around Earth aboard Vostok 1 and experienced weightlessness for 89 minutes. Several weeks later, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, sent up the first United States astronaut aboard the Freedom 7 Mercury spacecraft. Alan Shepard flew for 15 minutes and came down safely in the ocean. After Shepard, America's first astronauts completed solo flights of up to 2 days. They flew in capsules that were about the size of a small closet. The first United States spacewalk came during the Gemini mission on June 3, 1965. 4 years after the first spacewalk, people would walk on the moon. The Apollo program began in 1963. It was designed to land humans on the moon and bring them safely back to Earth. On July 20, 1969, millions of TV viewers worldwide saw Neil Armstrong, an astronaut on Apollo 11, step out onto the cold, airless, dusty surface of the moon. It was the first time that a human being had ever walked on another world. Neil Armstrong was 240,000 miles from Earth. That's 10 times the distance around our planet. 11 Apollo flights to the moon were launched between 1968 and 1972. The Apollo spacecraft were made up of 3 parts: a Saturn V moon rocket, a Command and Service Module, CM, and a Lunar Module, LM. The Saturn V was the largest rocket ever launched. At 365 feet high, it was 60 feet higher than the Statue of Liberty and weighed 13 times as much. Most of the space inside was taken up by fuel. An ordinary car could drive around the world about 400 times with that much fuel. 3 hours after liftoff, the rocket separated and fell back to Earth. It took 3 days for an Apollo spacecraft to travel to the moon. 2 astronauts flew the LM down to the moon's surface, while the 3rd astronaut orbited the moon in the CM. To leave the moon, the top half of the LM blasted off, using the bottom half as a launch pad. The bottom half of the LM remained on the moon, and the top linked up with the CM. After the astronauts entered the CM, the LM was cut loose. The CM was the only section that could make it back to Earth. On entering Earth's atmosphere, parachutes opened to slow its rapid fall before a splash landing in the sea. The crew was picked up by waiting ships. In 4 years, 27 Apollo astronauts went to the moon, and 12 walked on its surface. Because there is no air, water, or weather on the moon, the footprints and the American flags they left there may last for 1,000,000 years. The Apollo missions showed that astronauts could work on the moon in only 1/6 of the gravity of Earth. The 6 missions that landed on the moon brought back 880 pounds of lunar rocks and a wealth of information about the moon. But because human space travel is so expensive and dangerous, only unmanned spaceships to the planets have been used since the Apollo missions. Space shuttles were spacecraft made to be used many times. The first, Columbia, was launched in 1981. The last, Atlantis, was launched in 2011. The shuttles were designed to make human spaceflight safe and less costly. After each launch, the booster's parachutes opened and the booster fell safely back into the ocean where they were picked up to be used over again. Meanwhile, the orbiter traveled around Earth at 4 to 5 miles per second. At the end of the mission, it re-entered the atmosphere, glowing red-hot from friction with the air. Finally, the orbiter landed like an airplane, opening up a parachute in the rear to help it slow down. Since 1998, the United States, Russia, and 14 other countries have built the International Space Station, ISS. The space station is a kind of small world orbiting Earth. In it, an international crew of scientists live and work for 3 to 6 months at a time. They do all kinds of experiments about Earth and space. The ISS is the biggest object ever flown in space. The largest part has 16 huge solar panels attached. It's bigger than a football field. You can easily see the ISS from the ground. It's one of the brightest objects in the sky as it passes overhead during dusk or dawn. It looks like a fast-moving star. Currently, the ISS is scheduled to be taken out of orbit in 2016. Though many people want to become astronauts, only a few dozen are chosen for training. They need to know as much as a scientist and be as fit as an athlete. They are trained to use spacesuits, parachute jump, and survive emergency landings. The astronaut pilots also learn how to fly the shuttle. Trainees experience low-level gravity aboard a jet known as the Vomit Comet. The plane flies to 35,000 feet and then falls 10,000 feet in a steep dive. For 20 to 30 seconds, the astronauts experience weightlessness and float around the cabin. The plane repeats the dive as many as 40 times a day. Another training exercise takes place in a huge water tank called the Weightless Environment Training Facility, WETF. The tank contains a life-size reproduction of the shuttle's orbiter bay or other space facilities. Astronauts wear special suits that neither float nor sink in the water. The suits allow them to practice doing tasks in the weightlessness that they will experience in space. If human beings tried to live in the vacuum of space without protection, they would explode. Spacesuits provide the protection people need and the oxygen they must breathe. They also help to keep people warm in space, where the temperature is known as absolute zero, or negative 459 degrees Fahrenheit. Astronauts wear different suits for launch, for work outside the spacecraft, and for their return to Earth. Inside the shuttle or space station, they wear everyday clothing such as t-shirts and shorts or jogging pants. The Extravehicular Mobility Unit, EMU suit, is for working outside the space station. It has a life support backup that keeps fresh air flowing to an astronaut's lungs. The helmet, gloves, top, legs, and boots lock together so that air cannot escape. Underneath the suit, an astronaut wears clothing containing a network of tubes of water. They can be heated or cooled to protect an astronaut from the freezing cold of space or the heat of direct sunlight. Astronauts in space have to breathe, sleep, exercise, eat, and use a toilet just like people on Earth. But because they are in a weightless environment, much is done differently. The astronauts need a constant supply of fresh oxygen, so air has to be recycled. Water vapor from their breath is collected and recycled for drinking. Sleeping bags are tied in place so that the astronauts don't float when sleeping. Drinks are sucked through tubes so drops of liquid don't float around. Food trays attached to a crew member's legs with straps. Despite the low gravity, most foods stick to ordinary spoons and forks. But if an astronaut drops a knife or fork, it floats about the cabin. Astronauts even have a toilet that uses air rather than liquid to flush away wastes. Wet wipes are used to clean their bodies afterward. Each day in space is full of carefully planned activities for astronauts, whether they are doing experiments, eating, or exercising. They study how humans can live in space for long periods of time. They investigate the effects of weightlessness on people, animals, plants, and equipment. Extravehicular activity, EVA, is work outside the spacecraft, such as building the space station, fixing problems, or doing experiments. Astronauts on an EVA need to be tied to the spacecraft by a strong rope. They may also wear a Manned Maneuvering Unit, MMU, a jetpack powered by a tank of gas that allows an astronaut to move around the craft. Tools are not easy to use in the weightlessness of space. Even tightening a screw may need two people. One person to push on the screwdriver and another to turn it. Otherwise, an astronaut may turn his or her own body rather than the screw. A spacecraft contains hundreds of thousands of parts. The failure of even the smallest part can result in tragedy. On January 28, 1986, 74 seconds after liftoff, the shuttle Challenger exploded, taking the lives of all 7 crew members. 17 years later, on February 1, 2003, another terrible accident happened. The shuttle Columbia broke apart and burned as it was descending from orbit, again taking the lives of all 7 crew members. Scientists in the space program try to figure out the causes of accidents and make sure that they don't happen again. Disasters are rare, but they remind us once again of the dangers of space and the bravery of space travelers. A satellite is any object that orbits around a larger object in space. The Moon is Earth's only natural satellite, but more than 1,000 tiny man-made satellites have been sent into its orbit. Communication satellites beam television pictures, telephone, and computer messages all over the world. Weather satellites watch for storms and changing temperatures of the air, land, and sea. Global positioning satellites can tell people exactly where they are. One of the most famous satellites, the Hubble Space Telescope, has even taken pictures that are almost at the very end of the universe. Humans have visited the moon, but small robot space probes have gone even farther. Ranging in size from a car to a lunchbox, these probes have visited every planet in our solar system. They have also taken close looks at the sun, planetary moons, asteroids, and comets. Pioneer 10 was launched in 1972, more than 40 years ago. It flew by Jupiter in 1973 and began its journey to the stars. In 2007, Pioneer 10 traveled out of range, and we can no longer track its signal from Earth. It is traveling over 25,000 miles an hour toward the red star Aldebaran. That's 7 miles per second. Even at that speed, it will take Pioneer 10 over 2 million years to reach the star. Perhaps the most famous of all space probes is Voyager 2. Launched into space in 1977, it was supposed to last for 5 years and visit 2 planets, Jupiter and Saturn. But against all odds, the 10-foot-tall probe continued on to Uranus and Neptune. It is still traveling outward to the stars. Aboard Voyager is a greeting to the universe, a gold-plated record containing messages in 56 Earth languages, along with the sounds of life on our planet. Some space probes go into orbit around a distant world. Some plunge through its atmosphere or even land on its surface. Space probes have passed through the atmosphere of Venus and Jupiter and made many unexpected discoveries about our solar system. On July 4, 1997, the Mars Pathfinder lander and its tiny robot rover, Sojourner, landed on Mars. They sent more than 17,000 images of the planet back to Earth. Pathfinder examined the chemicals, rocks, and soil on the surface of Mars and gathered facts about its weather. This information has led scientists to believe that long ago Mars was warm, wet, and had a thicker atmosphere. If water once flowed over the surface of Mars, there is a real possibility that life may once have existed here. We live at the dawn of the space age. In years to come, astronauts may return to the moon and visit the closer planets. Perhaps one day, people may even live in space stations, on the moon, or even on Mars. As Neil Armstrong said when he became the first human to set foot on the moon, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.